Let's get started. My name is Cassey Lottman. I'm here to talk with you about diving into an existing Eleventy project. So you've probably seen some tutorials. If you want to start an Eleventy project from an empty text editor and an empty folder, here's what you would do. And those are really great and a super helpful thing for learning. But most of the time when I've done Eleventy projects, I've started from either a template or remixing a site that someone else has been working on, or it's a project for work and the initial structure of the project was set up by someone else. So I'm going to talk a little about what configuration options are available in Eleventy and what to look for, so that when you're going into a starter template or a project that someone else has already worked on, you can kind of get a sense for where the important bits are and where you can start making your changes to make the site your own. So a little about me just to start off. I'm a junior partner at Unabridged Software in Lincoln, Nebraska, which is a fancy way of saying I'm a senior developer with extra responsibilities. So I do things like client communication and reach out to prospective clients. I'm a firm believer that your pet should have their own website. You can see mine at tai-cat.info and soulpatch, all one word, .info. You should have one too. I have a web ring for pet sites, mostly of my former coworkers' pet sites that I swindled them into creating. But you should make one too. Make it with Eleventy. It'll be great. So yeah, you should do it if you want to. Okay, so here's what we're going to cover today. We're going to talk a little bit about installation, your inputs and output files, configuration, debugging, style processing, and then a few gotchas. And really there we're mostly talking about the data cascade, but it's going to be a really shortened version. I'm sure that the talk next month is going to cover so much more that you want to know about the data cascade. A few assumptions that I'm taking with this talk are that you already know something about Eleventy. You're a little bit familiar with it. If this is your very first look at Eleventy or static site generators in general, this might not be the talk for you, but hopefully you at least have encountered static site generators before. That'll be kind of our baseline assumption for this. And yeah, I think I already talked about the assumption is that you're working from an existing project, but I think this talk will be helpful even if you're starting from scratch, because if you've been wondering, how can I customize this app to make it fit the directory structure or the project structure that I want to have, I think knowing about some of these configuration options will be pretty helpful. So first, installation. How do you start running an Eleventy project when you've cloned the repo? What now? Eleventy runs on the NPM ecosystem or JavaScript ecosystem. So you need to install packages once you've downloaded the code. There's two different ways of installing packages in JavaScript world. There's NPM and there's Yarn. Those are the two main ones. There might be others. Sorry if you're a third-party package installer. If you see a package-lock.json, then you'll want to do npm install just to keep consistent with what's already been done in that project. And if you see a yarn lock, then you'll want to do yarn install, and then you'll run. Hopefully there's a start script, so you can just do npm start or yarn start. But if there's not, you can do npx at eleventy/11-serve. And a gotcha there is if you just do npm eleventy without that prefix of at eleventy/eleventy, sometimes it will work as long as you have the packages installed already. But if you've forgotten to run install, you will get the wrong package. And it will not be the Eleventy that we know and love. It'll be some other guy's package whose name is also Eleventy, doesn't have that namespace. And you'll be very confused. So make sure you have that namespace when you get running. In case you're not familiar, this is a sample package.json or a little subset of it. And the scripts section here and the start script in particular is what you want to look at. These scripts are really helpful when you're looking at an existing Eleventy project, because that'll give you a hint at what the developers who have used this project before expect you to need to do when you're working with this project, or what things the build process or the deploy process might be doing. And start is a really common name that people will use, and you can just do npm start. For the other scripts, you need to add a run in there. So you would do npm run build instead of just npm build, and you want to do that to use that script down there. So let's go on to inputs and outputs. The main thing here is you want to know what your output directory is and then leave it alone. You want to make all your changes outside the output directory, because when you run the build, everything in that output directory gets overridden, and you don't want to have your changes be lost because they were in the wrong file and got overridden. Let's talk about configuration real quick. Your main config file is going to be .eleventy.js, and the dot there is important at the beginning. You can change the name of that config file, and so if you don't have a .eleventy.js, check that start script that we talked about in package.json or the README to see if they expect you to pass in a command line argument when you do npx eleventy/eleventy to set the config file. But most of the time in the projects that I've seen, people stick with that .eleventy.js. I mean, this is a file that's going to look something like this. Config can also happen in the command line arguments, and you'll hopefully see those in the start and the build scripts if those are getting set. But for the most part, I think config is usually happening in the Eleventy.js config file. And that's mainly what we're going to focus on here. Though a lot of what we're talking about, you can set at the command line if you really want to. The config section, I think of it, or the config file, I think of it as having two main sections. So there's your first line, which sets up modules.exports equals function 11t config. And then after that, there's a section for doing the configuration API. It's the body of the function. And then there's the return of the function, which are in the docs referred to as the object options, or the options object. I think I got that backwards, options object. And this is where you're going to have some keys that can change things. For some things, you can only set them through the options object, the return there of your 11t config. For other things, you can set them both through the return value for the options object or using the configuration API. And so I'll show you as we talk through the different options, like both ways of doing them. But just be aware that even if you don't see it like in the bottom of here, you might have to also search for the config up here if you're looking for a config setting that you are not seeing. Yeah. So by default, the build directory that I mentioned that you are not going to touch is _site. But this can be changed. You can change it in this options object down here. Like if this was my 11t config, the output directory would be dist instead of site. You can also change this in the command line. So again, look to your package.json. There'll be a -output that will change the output directory. Here, we're also changing the input directory. And all of your code and what Eleventy is looking for is going to be relative to that input directory. So here, I would expect to find all your Eleventy stuff inside views instead of inside the root directory or inside source or something like that. Other important directories. Remember, these are all relative to your input directory. There's the includes directory, which is _includes by default. You would change those in dir.includes in the options object. So if we go back inside dir in this options object, if you had another thing that said includes as the key and a different directory there, that's where your layouts, partials, macros, and other goodies would all be. The layouts directory is not something I've seen a ton. The layouts are inside the includes by default in Eleventy. So your layouts directory could be set in that options dir object, but for the most part, they're either going to be an _includes or in whatever the value of dir.includes is. Also, you've got your data directory, which is _data by default. That's your global data file that are available to all of your templates. And you can change that in the options object, once again, with dir.data. Now let's get into configuration. There's so many different options and ways that you can configure your Eleventy project. When I'm approaching a new Eleventy project, I like to just kind of scan through the config. Sometimes they get really long. Hopefully yours isn't, just to kind of get a sense for what's going on there. And you can always look up if you see any Eleventy config dot something. What does this mean? The docs are pretty great at explaining what each of those config options and the configuration API methods will do. So a lot on this slide. Sorry, it's overload. We'll go through it slowly. First, we've got your template formats. There's the template formats would be things like, are you going to write your templates in Nunjux or Node, or not Node, Nunjux or Pug or Haml or Liquid. There's a lot supported by default, but you can override and extend the template formats. That'd be the key of template formats in your options object, or using the configuration API, so Eleventy config or whatever your argument to the function is in your Eleventy.js. You would call Eleventy config.set template formats, and you can pass in an array of just the template formats that you care about. Layout aliases are really helpful. So if you have a layout, it includes /layout/post. You don't want to write that big long file name in all of your posts. So you might say alias layout to alias include /layout/post to just the word post. You'll find those with add layout alias using the configuration API. And then another option that I think a lot of people aren't familiar with is the HTML and Markdown template engine. So what does that mean? In Eleventy, if you have a file that is just a Markdown file, like it ends with .md or it ends with .html and it's just HTML, you actually can use Liquid or another template language's syntax within that file. The default is Liquid for these, and so it'll run your Markdown or your HTML through the Liquid processing engine and then process it as either Markdown or HTML using the default Eleventy processors for those with HTML, pretty minimal processing. A lot of times, if the main template language of the project is something like Nunjux or something different, then you'll see that the HTML and the Markdown engine is overriding to use that other template language in the Markdown files too, so that your layouts and your blog posts in Markdown are using the same template language. You can also override these per page in the front matter with template engine override as the front matter key. In the first version of these slides and in my blog post, I mentioned that template engine override works through the data cascade too. So you could set it at the directory level for all the posts in this directory, use this template engine instead. But I just saw a note in the docs, and there's a GitHub issue reference, it's number 445 in GitHub if you're curious, that there's actually a bug with that right now. It doesn't work to set it in the data cascade. It has to be in front matter for this particular thing and this particular key. And we'll talk a little about the data cascade later. For the most part, anything you can set in front matter can be set in the data cascade, but template engine override is a special. And if you want to set these in the config object, it'll be Markdown template engine or HTML template engine, or you'll see both of them if both of them are getting overridden. Okay. I want to talk about a few debugging strategies for Eleventy, because if you're jumping into a new project, there's a good chance that something might go wrong or something might be happening that you're not sure why. So the first and kind of the oldest way of doing debugging in Eleventy is setting debug as an environment variable and then starting up your server. So these are screenshots from the docs. Probably if I was running this locally, I would add -serve to each of my npx Eleventy commands because I want to actually be able to go click around the site after I have built it. There's also PowerShell instructions for this on the Eleventy docs. So if you're a Windows PowerShell user, you're not out of luck here. You can still use debug mode. The debug mode I found is very verbose. It has a lot of really helpful information sometimes, but it's not always what you're looking for. And it's a lot to parse through because it spits out very verbose information on everything. So instead, a newer feature of Eleventy that I like to use a lot is the log filter. This is built into Eleventy as a version 0.11.0, and you'll use this in your templates to console log the value of any variable you want to see. So yeah, pretty simple. It's a log filter. If some of your variables aren't working, you can inspect those variables, and the console logs will go to the Eleventy server output. So if you're not seeing it on the page, that's why. Okay, I don't have a lot to say about looking for CSS and other build steps, but that's something I generally want to look at when I'm going to a new project too, is where are the styles coming from? and what else is happening in this project. Are there other build steps that are doing minification? Are there build steps that are handling image processing? If you haven't been around Eleventy for a little while, or you first took a look at it a few years ago, the before build hook might be new to you. You can set before build in your Eleventy config and do all kinds of neat stuff in there. I've seen people do CSS processing using like Node Sass inside before build, which is a really great way to remove your dependency on gulp or grunt if those are the only things you're using gulp or grunt for. If the project is using gulp or grunt, you'll see a gulp file or a grunt file. Hopefully the README will mention it. If it doesn't, look in package.json for a script that triggers those files to, or any like before build or post build scripts that make those run automatically. And now we're going to talk about gotchas. And here, again, mostly we're going to talk about data cascade as a potential gotcha and something that can cause things to be set or front matter values to not be quite what you expect. So the data cascade means that data is merged together from a few different places, and by a few, 7 or more, before the template is rendered. That's the data cascade. These are listed in order here, but the order, and this is pulled right from the docs, is a little confusing because computed data comes first, and that means it's highest precedence. That does not mean that it gets parsed first. So computed data, which is defined using Eleventy computed, either in front matter, or you can put your computed data in a bunch of different places, that can actually use front matter or data keys from other places in your Eleventy computed, and the Eleventy computed will take the highest precedence for whatever's there. So if you're computing something like the permalink, and you also have your permalink needs to take in the title that you set in front matter, you can do that even though computed data is top on this list. So next up we have front matter in a template, front matter in layouts, template data files and directory data files, and those you can identify by the file name. The file name should match either the directory or the template, and then have a particular prefix, and we'll see those prefix or postfix suffix. We'll see those suffixes on my next slide. And then there's your global data files and your custom global data, which was new to me. You can add global data through the Eleventy config with Eleventy config.add global data. And so what are those suffixes? The big thing to look for is Eleventy data.js or .json, but also it could just be matching the file name or the directory .json. So just something else to be aware of if front matter is not quite what you expect, or you want, or you're not seeing front matter values in the place that you expect, like on a template, you might check for these directory data files. And this is also a great way to clean up your templates. If you're setting layout post on every single thing in post directory, then you can add a post/post.json and set your layout once for all your posts and set all of them to have the tag equals post or whatever tags you need. This leads into the real gotcha of this section, which is if you're setting something like tags or some other value in your directory or template data files, and you're also setting them on the individual template or in a layout, then you may need to set data deep merge true if that hasn't already been done in your project. So hopefully your project is already using this. And if you're using Eleventy 1.0, this will be the default. True will become the default, but in prior and like stable versions of Eleventy, the default for data deep merge is false. But if you're using the data cascade, your expected behavior, like the way that you are thinking it probably works, is probably for data deep merge to be true. So that's something that I always look for in a project, especially when tags start getting, if I'm getting a subset of tags that I expect to see, it's probably a data deep merge problem. So that is what I have for you today. I don't see any questions in the chat, but I'll be here for the rest of the meetup if anyone has questions on any of the things we talked about. And I'm on Twitter if you want to say hi there. I list my cat's websites on Cassey.dev, so go check them out and make your own pet website and tweet at me about it.